Okay, this is a talk about what I'm observing, and I'd like for you guys to reflect on your personal observations when you started programming. How language either helped you or hindered you. And I don't know what I'm saying by that, but what I realize is that when you get into technical topics, the words that the technicians use are going to be different than the learner.
Well, I was thinking of the web.
Most of the time, they're probably 70, 80, 90% good, but there's always technical stuff that goes by fast. Or when you're teaching someone, you don't really know how well they're receiving that message. Does it need to be repeated? Does it need to be slowed down, amplified, or sped up and gone on quickly to the next thing because you're getting some message that they're okay with it? So when I was first introduced to a fourth, it was at a Hexatron stringy floppy meeting on Crash 80 back in 1980. A guy by the name of Vern Tallman came in, talked about fourth on a little stringy floppy cassette, which is what used to be in your telephone answer machines. And that was memory storage and everything else, but how well he was and efficient he was at using that just blew my mind. But I'm not a programmer. I've never been a programmer. I'm more into RF microwave electronics. And as I said, as I began to get involved with other technologies, I began to realize that there's a mismatch that occurs when people say one word and they're thinking something else. An example was the other day, my wife had to go somewhere to help. She has to go to her aunt's house to help her for medical. So I asked her, what time are you leaving? She goes, 10 to 12. And I'm saying, make up your mind. 10 to 12, she meant, 9:50. And I go, oh, and for like 3 minutes or so, I was kind of getting angry because I needed to know what, make the coffee or whatever. And so then when I talked to, I actually was going into some other technology. I like race engines. I was at a conference we were discussing with a very high level engine builder who happened to disappear that morning. He went and had a brain. But I was talking to one of the guys there who was very knowledgeable on distortion and vibration. And when we start talking about camshafts, how they talk about how the valve train is sometimes affected by harmonics, and I asked him, where are the harmonics coming from? I knew that he didn't know. And this one guy who I really respect him because he knew his vibrations. He said, how can it come off the camshaft? Because it's the shape of the cam. If you do a Fourier transform, click. He didn't understand that. I barely understood, but I knew it enough that there's a hidden vibration that comes off the camshaft that causes the valve train to work differently than what you would expect. And then when I studied psychology, I began to realize that, gee, when Carl Jung began to look at how humans interact, how we transfer information, he began to create a methodology later on that turned into the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which gave you a method, not the method, but a method to begin to evaluate how to speak better with one another. It was a matter of transferring information using your preferred functions and knowing where your preferred functions are on their list of preferred functions, and there's 8 of them. Dr. Ting had given some talks on this, and I talked to him years ago about it when I began to study the Myers-Briggs. So I began to look at psychology as kind of impedance matching, just like in electronics. You got the same thing when you try to send a signal down a PC board to a circuit. There could be ringing, there could be radiations, there could be cross-coupling, all kinds of things. And so as I began to look at that and I began to think about programming, why is it when I think about doing something with a program, because I'd taken classes in Fortran and in C and BASIC and even COBOL. And yet I never went to them because that wasn't my job. I would just say, give me a pencil and paper, a calculator. I'd rather do that. And then when spreadsheets came out, they worked so much better. And I go, why? Well, actually what they were doing is they were taking the 8.5 by 11 load called a piece of paper, and I could dump it anywhere on that paper and move it around real easy without having to know in advance what line I want to start at, how wide it was. Because when I first began using my Trash 80, doing term papers in 1980, I realized I got to figure this thing out on the size of whatever the heck the Trash 80 got, which was different. It was 64 characters wide, I think. So then I began to think, well, maybe that's what's going on in programming languages. So I wanted to ask you guys, those of you who can remember when you first got introduced to any computer language, especially Forth, was there a bump or a smooth spot? Did you really get it quick, or did you have to wrestle with it a little bit? And it reminded me when I first was learning about frequency modulation, I read this one paragraph. I think I took a half hour to read that paragraph over and over and over till all of a sudden I got it. And what I found was I wasn't remembering the beginning as well as I thought I was. So when I got later on in the sentence, I forgot the beginning, so concentrated on the end. So I'm looking at the fact a computer language versus human language, they may have similarities. And how easy is it for someone to teach you a language or for you to learn a language? Can you learn it better reading on your own, or you want to hear somebody talk about it? Probably a mixture of the two. So with that, I'd like for you to maybe share some experiences, because I really want to use Forth on some of my projects, because I see where I want to do it, but I tend to do it in something like a spreadsheet. I'll create a formula, and then I go, but I need to do something better. So any experiences you guys could share about how easy or tough it is for learning a language, and if so, what languages either made it easy or hard for you? And someone mentioned today about using Forth-like words. I go, oh, I love that. What is a Forth-like word? Because I'd like to know some of those Forth-like words, so please.
I'll tell you, when I first looked at programming, I went to City College, I think, and they were using cards.
Yes.
No.
Read existing code.
My second attempt was basic.
John?
Thanks, Mike.
My first experience was computers using cards, and I thought that doesn't make sense. The second one was to learn basic. That didn't make too much sense, but Forth, yeah, reverse police, I could handle that. That was good. I'm not a programmer, I'm a designer. My friends do the code.
Go ahead. Anyone else?
I'll go.
I had a pretty much similar experience when I went to school, Michigan. My first computer course was on IBM 360, which had just come out. And there was a version of Fortran that they had at Michigan called MAD, for Michigan Algorithm Decoder, and I used punch cards as well. So that was tough getting used to, all that new stuff. And then there was PDP 11 assembly language. There was 8080 assembly language. There was BASIC, and I remember in BASIC, having the handbook of BASIC with me so that I could check on everything that I did, make sure I understood it before I put it down. But I understand what you and Doug are saying, that it's not natural to learn a second language, and some people do it better in one way than other, visually or in a space rather than, reading about it and doing it. So, fourth is nice because you can make your own words and you can rename things. So, that's maybe one reason why it's really popular. And I think that's about all I have to say.
No, that's what I like about the language, but at the same time, as I realize how words are misinterpreted easily, that what happens a lot of times, I'll read something even about a core programming language, and I get a different idea. If I have no one to talk to, I'm off on a rabbit trail. Yeah. Reno.
May I have it for a moment?
So I guess I feel that fourth, if you start with a blank page, I think fourth can be very hard. But if you have a well-written fourth program that you're starting with that has the words that mean something, then I feel that that can be very easy to learn and to use. So it's kind of this weird dynamic that I've noticed with fourth in particular, because you can really make anything be anything. And so with a blank page, there's almost too much freedom. Whereas if you had a very specific application and you understood, and it could be a small number of words in that application, then you can understand how that application is meant to work. And once you understand that, then you can tweak it to do other things. And so that's been my experience. So I was telling somebody at lunch that at LinkedIn, you'd have people that were very technical and people that were not very technical. And my experience was that the people that were very technical had a hard time with fourth, whereas the people that were not very technical had a much easier time with fourth. And I think it's kind of, to your point, I think they're approaching it with kind of a context with, this is how programs should look, this is how they should behave. Whereas if you don't have much, if you have a more open mind in some sense, then you can absorb it more easily.
More of a blank slate that's teachable.
Yes.
You don't have other words in the way.
Other preconceived concepts, structures, notions about how programs should be written.
Yeah. Anyway, my time is kind of up. All I want to do is hopefully ask you guys questions later. But the idea is that it's a learning experience full of interesting things. And that's what I like about fourth, is that it seemed to be the very first and only program I can say, well, I think I'd like to learn more. But again, I go to my spreadsheet first. Anyway, thank you.
I'll use this. All right. This is great. While we're transitioning to the next speaker, I wanted to mention that the program chairman is actually incompetent. Jurgen Panatsky was about to tell us about the 20 books about fourth that are on Amazon. So I want you all to go to Amazon now, buy a book, and maybe we'll get him, if he's accepting my humble apology for my feeble-mindedness, maybe he'll join us in December for a talk. The next speaker, that's a good question. Ragsdale. Bill